So I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Ellii Programme. We're on day 4 here now. Obviously, you all know that it's a programme looking at building the capacity, support, connections and collaborative opportunities across the women's support sector and beyond. And today's session, we're looking at everything sort of governance, legal structures, thinking about roles and responsibilities, even through to things like policies and procedures, the things that kind of slip off the radar when we're so busy looking at the doing and looking at creating social change and supporting the communities that we work with. So, this is the first of several sessions that focus a bit more on operational capacity building and sort of social enterprise and sustainability building, and what the next number of sessions are around. And we're excited to have a great group on today and a great panel, as you'll see, after lunch as well. So I just wanted to remind us where we are in the programme, because starting back this new year, it's been a bit overwhelming. Everybody we speak to is very busy, got an awful lot on, and it's like, where are we again? What day is it? We're still catching up on a lot of that. So we've run 3 days already. We had the luxury of running a few physical days, and then we started virtual between now and March time. As I say, we're there now looking at governance and so forth, and the next sessions coming up are looking at sort of business models and planning and financial sustainability. That's on the 26th of January. And we've got Gajinder Kang, somebody who's worked with us a long while, and he runs an organisation called Further Finance, alongside being a finance director within the charity sector for a number of years, and currently working for the Information Commissioner as their main sort of finance director. So he's coming to run a session with us. Then we've got sessions around theory of change, measuring impact and value, which is key to helping with strengthening bid writing, understanding what you're doing, marketing and communications. So we'll be helping people sort of recap where they're at or start some good practice around all of that. We've then got a session looking at sort of crowdsourcing for action and impact. That's not so much about crowdfunding, although we might touch on that and cover that. That day on the 9th of March, you'll see as part of International Women's Week. And so we will be coming to people to suggest ideas for what we want to do. But it's one of the days where I'm hoping to start to bring in external people, external organisations, and we'll be looking at how we collaboratively want to work together. We might run some additional training sessions that day. For example, we've got people who might run training around child sexual exploitation, or we've got people who might run sessions around dealing with trauma, or we might have people that run sessions around influencing and policy research. Who knows? We've got a list of things we think we're going to do, and we'll come back to you with some further thoughts on making that day really work well. We've also got a way of helping people get their own sort of marketing and business plans supported. So it's an interactive day basically that we'll run on Zoom, and we'll explain more about it a bit nearer the time. We've then got a number of other days, and you'll see the dates are now in here, and there's a bit more information about these. So we've got a day with Yellow Jigsaw on the 16th of March, where this is a 2-hour session with them, and we're really going to be looking at storytelling and campaigning and using the media better. That's actually part of our wider bolt-on courses that Shelley will put a link to all of our additional courses in the chat, and we'll talk a bit more about those later. But
do you want me to say a bit about them now?
Yeah, do you want to say a bit about the wider ones, and then at least people know they've got a head
up? Absolutely. So this day 8 is part of the Ellii Programme, but it's also open to the wider world. So if any of your staff members or volunteers or even service users are interested in these bolt-on courses, then they can absolutely sign up. I'll put a link to our Eventbrite page in a moment. But we've basically got 2 kind of clusters of programmes. One is around creative, digital and marketing skills, and it's everything from campaigning and PR. We've got 2 podcasting sessions with Vic Turnbull from Mike. How to use WordPress to build a website. So if you don't have a website yet, or if you'd like a slightly more straightforward way to do it that you can control, so you don't have to get a developer to update it every time, WordPress is a really good place to start. How to sell your products and services online with Debbie Tomkes from Making Futures, who's also one of our directors. Using Canva to polish your brand, and this is another Yellow Jigsaw session. Yellow Jigsaw are fabulous. They're really, really good fun and engaging, and they are in their own right a social enterprise and a PR and marketing agency. Boosting your business using social media. And finally, a session around video content planning, design and editing. So I'll put all the links in the chat. We've also got some kind of employment, careers and enterprise sessions, which again might be really appropriate for some of your service users who are thinking about whether it's setting up something of their own, or self-employment, or just how to get on to the next step in their career, or even returning to work. There's some return to work appropriate sessions there. So I'll share those, and you just book onto those using Eventbrite. They're all completely free, and it's a pick and mix approach. So it's just a case of going through the menu, seeing which ones you think are suitable, and then sharing them, of course, with anyone else who you think might be interested in joining.
Brilliant, thanks, Shelley. And as I say, they're separate to what we're doing here, but you're very welcome at those. You're people that you're working with, you might want to promote some of them too. And they're all free. They're backed through the WEA and NatWest, and other pockets of money where we'd be able to pick them up. So really glad to have all that for people to. I've got a new hashtag, Shelley, that I've been putting out there. It's called 2022 starts with you. So the hashtag that we've got up there links to a lot of this stuff as well on Twitter for anyone that uses that. So following on from those, we've then got the two final days, one at the end of March, one at the end of April, are interactive days. We've left it suitably vague. So the day 8 will be virtual, but day 9 and 10, I'm really hoping to try and make at least one, if not both of those physical events. We've got the budget to do it. My concern is that we run things physically, and some of the wider influencers, policymakers, funders, or other people that we might want to bring to those events might be easier to get hold of if we do them virtually. So I think day 9 is going to be virtual, just to get more people physically there, and day 10 in my mind is going to be a real world one, or vice versa. So we're going to put some feelers out and just check if we can physically get people in a room, and we feel that's the best way to run it, we'll do it physical. But actually, if energy and contact wise it's easier to just do it virtually to get better use of time and get more people there, we'll do it virtually. It's the way of the world at the moment, isn't it? So hopefully that's helpful in terms of putting some context around where we are in this. I'm just going to flash these back up. So through the programme, we've co-designed these ground rules with you when we met physically over a couple of sessions, and then we've added to those and reviewed them as we've gone along, and we've tried to review them as we've gone virtual, because going virtual has its own sort of limitations, or miscommunication and sort of challenges. So we're just started to read through those, and if anyone's either got any questions or they wanted to come off mute and suggest something that might be missing, we will gladly sort of refine these. Or if you would prefer, you can always put something in the chat to say, I think this should be included, or you can message us privately as well if there's something on there that you think is omitted, or we need to discuss. We can look at that, or we can always pick it back up around lunch as well. So I'm not hearing anyone shouting out at me with anything, and most of this is sort of common sense stuff, and we've talked through this a few times, but it was just to make sure that we make the most of the day, that we're sort of efficient with our time, and that we're open to challenge, seeing things from different perspectives, and being brave enough to speak openly in those peer-to-peer conversations that we're going to have later. All right. So if whether you made it to last session that we ran or whether you didn't, the last session was all about kind of organisational development and getting people to reflect on what are they running, how is it running, and where are their strengths. And we talked through lots of things, but we use this tool at the start of the day at that time to kind of walk through where gaps might be in support needs, and where your levels of confidence and how your team's looking, if you've got a team, to be able to operate and run with confidence and be sustainable and be organised and everything else. Today's session builds on this, because governance and legal structures and having the right roles and responsibilities in your organisation for the stage of development that you're at are all critical to, you know, your organisational strength. And so we just wanted to sort of refresh our minds, take ourselves back to December when we ran that session around your organisation. And sorry, I'm just gonna there we go. And hopefully you may even have used the tools. We sent people these resources to kind of put your own comments, your own thoughts, make your own notes around this stuff. And you know, we'll happily sort of think through that with you. We are going to plan in some one-to-ones, so don't be surprised if me or Shelley or a member of the team tries to get in contact with you after today for just a 15-20 minute one-to-one between now and next month, just to see how things are going, evaluate a few bits and pieces, and basically to help shape and inform other days that we've got coming up and that kind of thing. But when we come to talk to you for a one-to-one, we could absolutely look at things like these tools if you've got thoughts or queries, and we'll be coming back to you on that. But picking up on these different elements of how, you know, there's so many balls to juggle when you're running a charity, social enterprise, be that a women's support organisation, health and wellbeing organisation, community group. It's, you know, it can get quite overwhelming, and the idea of setting up your governance is a way of helping you manage all the things you're trying to do. Nobody, you know, can do everything they're trying to do alone. We've got lots of people on the call here who are perhaps early stage, starting up, might even be piloting an idea, right through to people who've got their governance and legal structures set up, then through to people who have been running, you know, 5-10 years plus. And the thing about legal structures and governance and roles and responsibilities is it's a never-ending learning curve, you know, and we've designed this session to sort of think about this topic, whatever stage you're at. And starting off, I was just going to recap a few bits and bobs, and if anyone's got any thoughts or they wanted to, you know, say that's a load of rubbish or ask questions, then feel free. But before I got into governance structures, I was just going to talk about terms, because people talk about these things and these aren't governance structures. Well, charities are, but you know, there are charities, there are community enterprises, social enterprises, creative enterprises, health and wellbeing enterprises. There's almost a different language, you know, for different, you know, depending on the culture of your organisation, the sectors that you're working in, communities that you're working in, and who you're funded by. And I just wanted to kind of pay attention to that, really, and, you know, talk about, or just think about, you know, the differences, the kind of profit or not profit principles, and remind people or let people know about potential allies or toolkits or places to go for support, case studies and information. And that's what this slide summarises. So basically, you know, charities can be local. They might be supporting a particular community of need that you know, they've got a number of charitable aims and objectives that might be needed locally, or they might be national priorities. And charities will have a cap on trading activities, and they can only trade for primary purpose. I think it's about £80,000 that they can physically trade, and that trading has to happen for primary purpose. They're, you know, not for profit. They're overseen by the Charities Commission, and they'll often have, or you know, they'll always have either a voluntary management committee or a group of trustees. And those trustees on charity organisations aren't paid. The new governance model you see in a minute, the CIO, Charitable Incorporated Organisation, gives a slight bit more flexibility on valuing trustees' time, but the golden rule of charities is trustees aren't paid, and that's the difference between community interest companies and charities, is that directors on kicks can be paid. You know, in terms of profits, charities don't make profits as such. They might be turning over millions. You know, they might be paying their chief executive anything from, you know, 25 to 50 to 150,000 pounds. People get paid in the charitable organisations, get paid well, hopefully. Depends on how they're structured, what they do, and or what the principles are. Some charities, you know, everybody's voluntary. You know, it's just it varies. It's down to what you set yourselves and what your board or your trustees set you. And as I said, trading's capped, and so they're a genuinely non-profit organisation. And as I say, have a look at the Charities Commission or NCVO, and if people have got thoughts on other toolkits or other organisations to go for as a charity, you can put that in the chat. We've talked a lot about councils for voluntary services already, but clearly every borough of Greater Manchester that we're working in pretty much has a CVS, and we've already talked about that. They're another good ally for charities and voluntary organisations. Community enterprise is a slightly new term that came about, I don't know, in the last 5-10 years. There's always been community enterprises, but it's been a kind of coined phrase for a little while now by organisations like Power to Change and Locality. The School for Social Entrepreneurs have been partnering in with some of that as well and talking a lot about community enterprise. These are more place-based, sort of community-based organisations and businesses that they're locally owned, locally led organisations. They're often seeking to regenerate an area, regenerate underutilised buildings and assets, or they're led by community-minded entrepreneurs. They'll usually they can make a profit. They're not often set up as a charity. They can be, but traditionally they might not be. And they might be seeking to generate profits on purpose to reinvest back in their community, in their area, and create local jobs, that kind of thing. Power to Change, the Plunkett Foundation, which works sometimes more with rural areas, and Locality are organisations that are helpful allies around that term. If you think you're a community enterprise and you haven't looked those organisations up, then you should.
A question there, Nicola.
Go for it, yeah.
So what legal structure would community enterprises typically have?
We'll show you in a minute, so don't worry about that. It's just, I'm going through terms at the moment, just because what happens is we talk about legal structures and people say, oh, well, I'm a social enterprise or I'm a community, and they think that's a legal structure, and it's not. It's just a term or a phrase. A charity technically is a legal structure, but the others aren't. So, and you'll see why in a minute. I was just walking through these terms and slightly different angles. There was slightly different take on different kinds of non-profit organisations. So social enterprises, that term's been used for, over 20, 30 years now. And often they're led by people who've got entrepreneurial solutions to social issues. Sometimes they're community led, but they're not always. Sometimes, sometimes they're thematic. They're usually that they're trying to tackle a social issue with an entrepreneurial solution, and like a community enterprise, are seeking to make a profit to reinvest that profit back in the community. So unlike a charity that's wholly charitable and can't trade up to up over a certain amount, community enterprises and social enterprises do trade. They seek to trade wherever possible, and their business models are usually based on at least 30 to 50, maybe even hopefully higher levels of trading, often offset with grants and other things that they are eligible to apply for as well. And we've probably talked about these people before, but if you think you're in the social enterprise camp, organisations like Unlimited, Social Investment Business, the School for Social Entrepreneurs are organisations that have good toolkits, information, sometimes funds and investments available for people, just like Power to Change and Plunkett and Locality do, who've got a more locally based focus around community enterprise. And I've thrown in here creative enterprise, partly because it was on the slide, but what happens is a lot of people in our sector are sort of creative entrepreneurs. There might be arts for well-being, or there might be using arts and cultural development or creative digital development to regenerate communities. Don't get me wrong, there's a whole creative industry which they'll have a foot in, worth billions, that is a wholly profit-making sector. But the creative entrepreneurs and health and well-being entrepreneurs do feature heavily in, and training and learning entrepreneurs do feature heavily in our sector for the outcomes that they produce and because of the mindsets of the people running these organisations. So I just wanted to highlight, it's an example of a sector specific type of enterprise where There might be for community purpose, there might be for private gain. And, you know, there's this term profit for purpose that comes up. And so there might be people who are making surplus profits on purpose to do good with. They might not have a social enterprise model as a governance structure, but because of their nature, because of their mission and their ethics, they're choosing to operate in the social economy. And there are allies linked to those sorts of entrepreneurs are the likes of Nesta, the British Council, the Arts Council, and I guess there's Innovate UK as well, could be in there. But it's just showing the breadth. Sometimes when you're in the charity sector, you forget that there is sort of factions within it, and there are these other allies, other ways of getting funding, and other ways to connect to new networks that can always be helpful in strengthening what you do. And, you know, in the women's support sector, you know, people can be most of the grind, not busy sort of supporting what they're doing. You can't always come up for air to think about these things. So that's why I've sort of set out that terms, and just to broaden thinking around what these, you know, camps look like, I suppose. So just to answer that question now, Shelley, on what you were saying before, or that's come up, we're going to talk about the different structures, and it can sound a bit dull at first. Governance, legal structures, it can sound a bit scary. So I put some pretty pictures here. So, you know, what we're trying to do, or what we're hoping to do, is bring legal structures to life, and you know, and help organisations and social enterprises and charities, you know, govern themselves well. That's what these things are there to do: make people's lives a bit easier, make the job less stressful, build teams, build allies around what you're doing, so that or you know, you can think that you're doing that, but actually if you're not operating it effectively, then, you know, it can be a drain as well. So we'll look at that. I'm not going to go through these case studies of pictures like I normally would, but if anyone's dying to know who these are, we can let you know another time. So if there are people on the call here who might be early stage and you know, thinking, I haven't got a clue what I should be, and even if you have set up, did you think it through? Because what can happen is people can rush into setting up a governance model and it can backfire, or they can get hold of some accountant or some friend or some other person who says, oh, you need to be this. And time again, I end up working with people who have set up the wrong thing and have to go back to square one. And so when we're working with people and looking at what do you need to be, we'll often ask people, you know, who wants to own this thing? You know, who do you see running this, and who might run it in future? Who's going to own it? Because that then helps you decide whether you're going to incorporate, whether you're going to be a sole trader, whether or not you want community ownership, and make it more sort of cooperative and collaborative, or whether you want to have a small board, large board. So we're thinking these things through helps you build the group and the team, and who might come on board to help you. Another question that we get people to think about is, where's the money coming from? You know, how are you going to make income? You know, how are you going to generate resources for what you're doing? Do you plan to make a profit or not? Does profit feel like a dirty word? And if so, how are you going to be sustainable? And, you know, what are tax implications in the way that you're going to operate? So thinking about these things helps you again decide, are you going to be on the more profit making end of the spectrum, on the charitable end of the spectrum? You know, and you'll see I've got a diagram of this in a moment. It helps you think about where you feel most comfortable, and how do you want to be viewed, sort of, you know, as is the next one, or some of the next ones. So who you're working with, you know, that your beneficiaries, your, you know, immediate community, whether that's a local community, thematic, kind of community of particular need based on some sort of problem or challenge in society. Who's your market and your community for what you're going to do? And have they got the resources to buy your products and services is a big one. You know, if they've not got the cash to pay for what you're going to offer, there's a good chance that you need to be a social enterprise or a charity in some cases. And you know, are the people in your community going to have a stake in your organisation in some way? What involvement, you know, are they there as just beneficiaries, or do you want them leading and having a voice and having a say? And, you know, are they going to be shaping this? thing, and will it be helpful? Are they going to shape your organisation, or are you a 2 or 3 man band who's just going to run what you're doing and create some great social impact? So, you know, and thinking these things through, and thinking about the role the community and wider beneficiaries are going to play, it can be key to what you set up as well. And sort of last but not least is the stuff around sort of trust, legitimacy, public perception. You know, how do you want or need to be viewed is another key question around, you know, why and how you might set yourself up. It links back to that role of the community, but it also links back to funders and what the wider social purpose and social value of your organisation might be. And charities and social enterprises are different to private sector businesses. Some of it's down to trust and ethics in theory, but some of it is down to the fact that charities and social enterprises, as you all know, most of you will know, end up applying for funding either to start the thing off, to do research and development work, or applying for funding for ongoing projects, programmes, core funding to help particularly charitable organisations or particular areas of innovation. So if you've, you know, how do you need to be viewed, basically? And especially if you're going to be going out and seeking to raise donations or seeking to raise money for charitable purposes, do you know, having that legitimacy as a charity over and above any other governance structure might be absolutely the right thing for you. So I just lay out those questions because, as I say, it's not something to be rushed into. Just, I mentioned before, the sliding spectrum. So you might recognise what you are there. I might take a minute just to perhaps hear from a couple of people, and we'll talk around this a little bit. But is anybody up for coming off mute to say what they are, what governance structure they've set up?
I can speak. So this is Tika.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, Women Arise. So we've been in operation since 2018, but because we didn't know how to navigate and to choose which model we want to adopt, we've still remained a community organization.
And so that's an unincorporated association. Absolutely.
Yeah, so hopefully this year we are going to choose at least.
That's a sensible, you know, that's a really sensible start, as you'll see on the next slide we're going on to. Giving yourself. Yeah,
and actually I wanted to check whether it's possible to have this in a document.
Absolutely, you're going to be getting all this, so don't worry about that.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
So that's interesting. So Tika's come on there to set up her organisation. As is often the way, you know, you are fumbling as you go at this stuff. Unless you've been part of boards before, or you've been part of a group, or you've had a job where this stuff's made sense, you're making it up as you go along. And that's fine, because most people are when they first start going. But then things can become quite involved quite quickly, depending on if you need to go for funding, as this slide dictates and shows here, or whether you, you know, making sure you've got the right insurances and policies set up, making sure that you're, as we're talking today, organising yourself in particular ways, and the way you govern yourself starts to become more serious, and picking the right structure becomes more serious. And it's interesting that Tika's come on as an unincorporated association there. That's at the philanthropic end of the spectrum, as opposed to kind of private sector end of the spectrum. And that means, from a funding point of view, you can fundraise, you could crowd finance, can potentially go for commission contracts. However, usually don't, because the commission contract has to go to somebody usually it's going to a named individual or a named company. Often commissioners, they might let you pilot things with a small commissioned piece of work, but if you're going to get serious about commissioning contracts, you would usually need to have some sort of more formalised structure, because the level of risk and who owns the insurance and how it's going to work has an impact. But basically, you know, at the philanthropic end of the spectrum, companies limited by guarantee, whether they've got charitable status or KIC status, unincorporated associations, and BENCOMs, which is like the cooperative version of the charitable version of a co-op, can all apply for all sorts of funding, as can the kind of group in the middle there, where, again, I've put companies limited by guarantees and KICs twice because Some are more charitable than others. Some are more grant reliant and working with communities where people physically can't afford to pay for their services, and they end up becoming more grant reliant in order to exist and offer what they do. Other companies limited by guarantee, whether they're KICs or otherwise, or companies limited by shares, they're trading more. Normally, by the time you got to the middle ground here, there's a good chance you'll be trading to some degree and selling some sorts of products and services. Even charitable incorporated organisations in the middle there, may well be selling training or selling services or selling merchandise in order to, under the threshold and for primary purpose, that they've got that option. And hopefully this slide's making sense in terms of different finance options that are there, from the fundraising and so forth, through to commissioning, through to grants and loan funding. All of these things we've talked about before as part of the kind of where's your income cocktail we talked about last time. This sort of shows you this in context with your governance structure. And at the more private sector end of the spectrum, you start to see that loans and equity investments are more likely to be an option for you if you look and feel more private sector in nature, or certainly if you're trading to some degree, because those loans need to be paid back, and that equity that you might seek from either an angel investor or a social investment investor, they'll want to see a viable, sustainable model that isn't grant dependent. So that's how this stacks up. I just thought we'll perhaps hear from one or two more people who've set up. Has anybody set up a KIC on the call here? And perhaps just hear from someone. I know Tina's there or Jenny's there. Wave at me, Jenny. There you go. You've set up Enterprise Bridge CIC, is that right?
Yes. Well, when I set it up though, Nicola, I set it up as a private limited company.
Yeah. And that's a good. Oh, you're frozen there for some reason. Was that me that's frozen? But you're back. Or are you?
That comes in from housing associations or banks or whatever, they don't care what kind of, because they know what I do.
Yes,
it has made it difficult for me to apply for certain pots of money because it's not set up limited by guarantee.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think absolutely, and we'll show you in a moment, what's preferable if you're needing funding, going for funding, whether that's at startup development or for core costs. But a lot of people, particularly with people in the women's support sector, may end up being a charity and charitable. Supporting women is a charitable aim in itself, but also there's a lot of reasons, aren't there, why all the people on the programme are doing what they're doing. They might be supporting health and well-being, they might be supporting things to do related to trauma or domestic abuse, they might be supporting people relating to financial hardship. And so these, again, are all reasons why it may be more preferable to be a charity because of the wider reach of funds that you can go to for that. So,
and then just on that, Nicola, I just, sorry, Jenny, the beginning cut off slightly, so you may have said this already, but I know a number of organisations who've been advised badly at the beginning and have maybe set up as a KIC limited by share.
Yes.
And that really restricts which pot of funding you can access as a KIC. So there's kind of charity opens the doors really wide. KIC, there's lots of pots there. A KIC limited by share, there's not very many grants or funds available.
Yeah, you'd set up as a limited by shares KIC if you'd come from a private sector background previously and that made sense to you. We often come across people or predominantly you weren't looking for grants at all. You were looking for investment.
Absolutely. If your model is like you say, if your model's more about trading,
yes,
and that's about accessing funding, then yeah.
And that can make more sense. Perhaps we'll just hear from one more person want to say hello and say what they've set up. I kind of was picking on Tina before because I know you set up a KIC in the last year or so. I don't know if you might say hello, or whether we've got anybody who's a CIO who's set up. We've worked with a number of CIOs now, and actually, what used to happen and still does happen is charities, as I say, is a term, and this company limited by guarantee with charitable status is what charities, once you've gone past the unincorporated association stage and you've decided that you want to incorporate, and we'll look at why that might be in a minute, you set up a company limited by guarantee with charitable status, but actually the Charities Commission has shifted somewhat, and the CIO is almost like a step on. It's like a further development, if you will, in the way, the governance models of the charity sector. And over time, less and less charities that are companies limited by guarantee will exist, and more CIOs will. And some, you can convert from a company limited by guarantee into a CIO if you wish to as well. CIOs, the governance models just evolved somewhat, and the way the governing documents are laid out for a CIO and what directors can do and how they can be remunerated is just changed a little bit more advantageously, so that whilst they're very philanthropic in nature, that constant sort of reliance on volunteerism, so to speak, shifts a little bit with the CIO. And I don't need to pick on people for picking on sake. So if somebody wanted to come off and just say a bit about their kick, or they've got a particular question, or they'd have to swap.
Jenny, you've got your hand raised.
Go on, Jenny.
No, just a quick question, and it may be something that I can come back to some of you later. Do you think I can convert mine into something?
I would have thought so, yeah. If you're a company limited by guarantee currently.
Limited by shares.
Limited by shares. Yes, you can't. What you have to do is you have to kind of close it and restart it, which can be a pain, and that's probably why you haven't done already. The companies limited by share are hard to convert. You'd still keep all your financial track record, you still keep all your branding and usual setup, but you could close the company limited by shares and replace it with a company limited by guarantee if you needed to. But we could chat again one-to-one on the pros and cons of that. And as you said, Jenny, earlier, sometimes depending on who you're going to and where your main income is, if your main income's contracts and if your business is based on your reputation, then we'd be asking, why exactly would you need to convert? And if it's about trying to access funding that you couldn't ordinarily access, we'd be asking, does it matter? Has it mattered up to this point? What have you not been able to go for that you wish you had? And it might be a good enough reason to close your governance model now and restart to evolve into a company limited by guarantee version. The other get around clause, which you already know, but I'm sort of saying for the purposes of the audience, is, if your governance model doesn't work for a particular funding structure, there's nothing stopping you partnering with people whose governance model does. So somebody like Jenny might partner with Flourish, or might partner with one of you in the room here, that there's a charity or a kick, to co-design something that Jenny's a delivery partner of. And so Jenny's not the lead applicant in the bid. And you'll see all the time, we're all part of these consortia bids or these consortia approaches, or those of you starting out, building your networks with, bigger organisations or complementary or more diverse organisations can really strengthen your approach to drawing down different pots of funding, larger pots of funding, longer term pots of funding. So that's another way around this kind of stuff. I'm conscious of time and I'm kind of rolling over it, aren't I, Shelley? So I'm just going to quickly roll on. A lot of you will know this, but it's just a recap on how do you go about setting up this stuff and what are you called. This little table here outlines the different types of organisations and what their governing documents are called. So I'm just going to whiz through it. So Tika mentioned earlier, she's a community group. So that would be an unincorporated association. Usually you'll have a constitution. Even if you're starting out, or maybe you're working with a group of beneficiaries who've got a great idea for something, and they need to set up on their own 2 feet, or maybe you've got an idea for a project that the board don't want to approve in your own organisation, but you've got a really good little working group of people who could set this up or start it, and it could be a part of your supply chain or something like that. You could be supporting your beneficiaries to set up a constituted group, and don't get me wrong, there's pros and cons to this, but to trial projects out, to get going. Often constituted groups are a great way of testing the waters. You can road test your directors before you set up as a company. You can apply for funding so long as you've got a minimum of 3 non-related directors or non-related people on your community group management committee. Then you'll be able to potentially apply for funding and start the ball rolling on that. There are constituted groups that have gone on for decades and decades because that governance model suits them best. It's quite flexible. You don't have to report back to the Charities Commission. You don't have to report back to Companies House. But you do have to govern yourself well, get appropriate insurance, and the individuals on the constitution are individually responsible for what happens in that organisation. So you don't have the limited liability where it says limited by guarantee, limited by shares. Those organisations, those companies have this clause about limited liability, which means that in the eyes of the law, if there's a slip, trip or fall, somebody gets sued or anything else, the book stops with the individuals in a constitution. So there's a little bit more risk attached to that. And my golden rule of thumb on that is, if you're well insured, if you're not managing money that's out of your depth and you're not trying to enter into large contracts that you can't manage, then constituted groups and unincorporated associations are fine for that. But if you got to a point, I don't know, you put your own threshold, let's say managing more than 25 to 30,000 pounds in any given year, or it could be, 50,000, I don't know, whatever you would set yourself for feeling a comfortable, manageable level of risk, that may be an overriding factor as to why you would then say, do you know what, I think we're going to become a company now for our, for this limited liability, to enter into different types of insurances, and also some commissioners, contractors, procurement portals would only accept you if you had registered company. So that's another point at which people might change. But on the constituted group end, for the not-for-profits, then an unincorporated association and an exempt charities, it's called here, charitable trust, are options for you. But we've also probably got people on the call who are almost like a profit for purpose sole trader, where individuals with great ideas, sometimes they have to set up as a sole trader because they can't do anything else. They've not got enough people around them to form a group yet, and they may want to be a one-man band or a freelancer that does good, and so people do set up as as a sole trader. Basically, you register with a HMRC, the tax man or woman, and you get this unique tax reference code, and you're up and you're running as an entrepreneur, be that a social entrepreneur with charitable purposes or otherwise. But you're not seen as having a governance model that ties in with the traditional sort of social enterprise rules. Then there's the incorporated batch, which a lot of you here will be. So you might be incorporated as a company limited by guarantee that has charitable status, that has KIC status, or you might just be a company limited guarantee private or a standard that operates profit for purpose. As in Jenny's case and in various other, you might be a company limited by shares with KIC status or without. And as I've talked about before, charitable incorporated organisation. These all have, a charitable organisation is technically called a constitution, but companies' governing documents are called memorandum and articles of association. And whereas constitution is like 2 or 3 pages, 2 or 3 sides of A4 that sets out who you are, how you operate, how frequently you're going to have meetings, what your responsibilities are, and what happens to any surplus resources should the organisation wind up. A memorandum and articles of association says similar stuff, but it's about 30 pages long. So there's like a step up really in terms of the level of depth and detail around things. And you will have probably noticed that. If you're running an organisation, have you even read your memorandum and articles of association? Do they make sense to you? What can often happen if you kind of hoodwinked, rushed, or shoehorned into doing this stuff? You just fill in the documents that somebody says you should do, and you think you've got it covered. But I would really recommend that you read these things, that you understand them, or if you're working for an organisation, check them out. do you understand their charitable aims and objectives? Do you understand what this organisation is about? And I mean, interestingly, if you're incorporated, your memorandum and articles of association are on Companies House. You know, if you're a KIC, they're on Companies House. If you're a charity, they're on the Charities Commission, and the public can read and see these. So they need to read right, and particularly for funders, the funders will look at these documents and think, you know, they'll use that as a tool to guide and inform their decision making on your applications, whether you realise that or not. And you'll know this because sometimes you have to attach this, you know, to a funding application. So don't not read that and do ask questions about it. And if you're inviting people onto your board or your committee or you know, your group, or as part of your trustee group, do your trustees, are they aware? Have they seen this document? Because they should be wanting to. And last but not least, co-ops. So co-ops have a document called rules, and they're more costly to set up, is a point. And so constitution costs nothing to set up. It's 3 sides of A4. It's a quick and easy way to get started. But as we explained before, there are some wider risks around that for individuals. Companies tend to cost about £35 to set up. Cooperatives can cost somewhere in the region of about 150 and upwards, depending on whether you go for standard documentation or bespoke rules. And there's examples of different cooperatives here. BENCOMs are registered by are overseen by the Charity Commission because it's a charitable form of co-op. Financial Services Authority work with other co-ops and oversee other co-ops that are then sort of non-charitable, and there are things called workers co-ops that are often seen as charitable, and they are overseen by Cooperatives UK. So I've given you quite a lot of information there around governance models, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought in thinking, do I understand my own governance model? Have I read the documents? Is it work? You know, what we're going to talk about going forward is it working for you? And we're going to give you some time to look at that shortly. But I just wanted to make sure people had heard these terms and are either resonating with you, oh yeah, that's what we are, or you're scratching your head thinking, oh, what are we again? Or you've not set up yet and this is giving you some food for thought. What I will say is, you know, you are more than your legal structure. Absolutely, you know, don't get overly worried or bogged down by this, because everybody's learning and everybody's putting in the best governance they can for the stage of development that they're at. But we're kind of throwing this at you because what we found with the research that we did and what we know with women's support organisations is sometimes they're that busy doing what they're doing, or they're small, or they've got a handful of people, all hands to the pumps, and you know, this organisational development support sometimes, you know, can fall off the radar a little bit. And then there are other charities, you know, who are set up, very well established and so forth, who are still having governance issues because they've got to refresh their board, or they've got some gaps and things like this. So this is just a reminder that you are more than your legal structure, and that operational and organisational strengths mapping, you know, will remind you of that. This is just a small fragment of it. But what we'll be getting you to look at in groups shortly is just thinking about this in a bit more detail. I don't want to talk for too much longer, only because I know I want us to talk and get into groups, but you will be getting these slides to think through at your leisure, you know, and thinking about how are things working for you, you know, what's most effective. And then, you know, ultimately, you don't need to rush, you know, your governance choices and decision making, but, you know, you do need to be accountable and plan for the future. What I've got here, and I'm not going to read through all this, we've got a couple of slides that just reminds you of what roles and responsibilities of directors and trustees are. And even if you aren't established as a social enterprise, as a KIC, or as a company, or as a charity, or a co-op, this still stands. Even if you're an unincorporated association and you've perhaps been going to, you know, 6 months, 2 years, or you're thinking about it, you still need to operate responsibly. And this, if you hadn't thought about it, or you've not seen this stuff down, these are the sorts of things, you know, that are critical to running an effective organisation, being compliant with the law, and ensuring both sort of financial accountability as well as good communication, proper fiscal oversight, and you know, good performance of the organisation. everybody who's involved in the governance of your organisation, must, demonstrate certain skills and competencies to be able to do what you're trying to do, and you set out what the skills and competencies are. They've got to, act reasonably as if they were looking after their own business, or if they were looking after their own stuff. And, there's some other points here as well to bear in mind. When you're at the point of setting up a company, ultimately you've got to obey the law, and there are some key things that you have to do as a company director. So you have to annually produce proper accounts and send various documents to Companies House or the KIC regulator. If you set up as a KIC, you'll know that you have to fill in a return each year as a statement of community benefit. It's called a KIC 36 form each year, and so that's something to bear in mind. There's laws that you have to adhere to, health and safety, potentially employment law if you're employing people, and taxation, corporation tax, and you're responsible for actions of employees as well as yourself when you get to the point of employing others. So they're just things to bear in mind, and the things we're going to give some tools and thoughts on later on today. If you're evolving, what happens is you can mushroom quite quickly. Sometimes, you've had a year or so of just piloting, and then things grow, and you can feel a bit out of your depth in making sense of all of this stuff. So that's what we're sort of here to help with and think through a little bit today. Any questions at that point? I'll just see if there's any key questions. I'm conscious of. No? You shout out, Shelley, if there's any in the chat, and we'll see. Sorry, I've got things overlapping.
We've just had a question from Joe.
Yeah.
Is there a list of foundation documents that need to be covered across the board of business types, please?
Say that again.
Is there a list of foundation documents that need to be covered across the board of business types, please? They're all different, aren't they? They're all different. So, ultimately what I was just saying there, so I think there's two answers to that question, because it's a big question and it's got different facets to it. So ultimately, you need to be keeping proper financial records, whether they're an income and expenditure, if you're just a constituted group and you're not reporting back to anybody. Having a log of receipts and your income and expenditure is a bare minimum. And then once you form, or you've been running a while, and you're certainly, when you're having to report to somewhere like Companies House or the Charities Commission, they'll want to see accounts, and those accounts are usually done by an accountant externally to you to give that legitimacy. And if you're a KIC, you'll need to send your KIC forms back. So as it says here, those are the key bits of documentation, and then anything else comes down to kind of what you are, who you're reporting back to, and so on. And if that answers your question, Joe. But it's and then in addition to that, what we're going to be talking about later are things like policies and procedures. They aren't mandatory, but there is it's having appropriate policies and procedures for your organisation, which we're going to show you a whole list of later and talk about with you, are another list, if you will. So the financial records and having it appropriate insurance are the key, and everything else are down to sort of direction, discretion, and sort of size of your organisation. I don't know if that answers your question, Joe, but we can gladly talk to everyone one-on-one. How are we doing for time? Because I know I'm kind of rolled over quite a bit there. We're quite over. It's 11:09.
Yeah. What I'm going to do, what I'm going to leave you with, because you're going to come back and talk about this in your groups, is I wanted to leave you with two examples, because we've got different sizes of organisations here, and in any session like this, you're kind of reflecting on where you're at now, and you might be thinking about the future. I've got two diagrams. One's a diagram of a kind of larger organisation that's well established, been running for a long time, and the other is a smaller, earlier stage. So as an example, a larger organisation will be established, whether they're a charity, a KIC, or whatever else. There will be a company of some kind with directors, and you may get to the point where you've got your executive directors and non-executive directors. Executive directors are people who usually employed and do work in the business. Non-executive directors are usually non-paid roles, so voluntary roles, whether you're a charity or a social enterprise, and they will often, non-executive directors are like a mentor or a guide or an advisor, but they're there as a non-executive director. So they still have full responsibility and are as responsible for the direction of the organisation as the chief executive, who's an executive director, but they're less involved day to day. Yeah, so executive directors are involved day to day. Non-execs are more around the edges and for particular areas of strength or skill. And you may, particularly charities or larger organisations, might have a chair of the board. You know, if you need that additional support or that additional go-between, you might have a chair of the directors who supports the chief executive and helps with overall governance. Additionally, larger organisations, they might have lots of different non-exec directors, as you see a whole list here. We're not expecting that you would have all of these. We're just giving you them as examples of the types of non-exec director roles that people create. And in this organisation, they create quite a few. And you've also might have audit panels to scrutinise certain things, external advisors, and wider stakeholder involvement groups. And some of these will be terms, you know, things that you're doing and you're starting or you've done or you've been part of. Often what will happen in very large organisations is where you've got lots of directors for different responsibilities, they might create different working groups to work on different aspects of the business or different aspects of the governance or organisation. So, and just show you that as, you know, when you see that, you go, oh, wow. Or I remember the first time I saw an organisational chart like that a while ago, you think, you know, people think, what do we need? What do we need to grow into? This just gives you a, not too large an organisation, but, you know, a direction of travel for certain organisations. And then just to flip back, where earlier stage organisations are, is perhaps, you know, you might be a project lead or you might be leading the committee of an unincorporated association. You might be a managing, whatever you call yourself, chief exec, managing director, CEO, COO, people call themselves all sorts, but it's a, you know, similar role to this, dependent on the size of your organisation. So that usually, as we said before, you need 3 non-related people to be able to apply for funding. And what lots of early stage organisations start as is they start as the lead of whatever you call yourself, and you'll have a treasurer and secretary, or you'll have 3 non-related people who take roles and responsibilities to both lead and manage the organisation, looking at the communications, which is what the secretarial role would be, and the treasurer looks more at the finances. You might not traditionally call yourselves that, but there'll be 3 non-related people within an organisation, if you're applying for funding, that fulfills those roles. And it might be you a lot of the time, and you'll delegate to your other directors or constituted group members as you go, and where you need and where they can. But it's just giving you that additional feel that on a smaller scale, there's those 3 core people and more, depending on how you've built up your group or your organisation. But there is still all of these other roles to fulfill, aren't there? So you might still, rather than having, you know, an audit panel and stakeholder involvement groups, you might be holding focus groups or have an advisory group. There might be other external advisors and funders and infrastructure support agencies that are feeding in to support you with the development of what you're doing. And then you and your board, or you and your team, be that staff or volunteers that we haven't included in these diagrams, are looking after, or will need to look after, all of these other facets. So, you know, I guess on a you know, Wednesday morning, if you've not thought about these things, this could be a little bit like, oh, you know. And what I will say is it's a case of, you know, you can only pace things, you know, as you are, and you can only manage, you know, what you need to manage for the size of your organisation. But these are all moving parts, you know, that the people are thinking about as they develop themselves. So I think I'm going to pause and hold it there, and just I think that comes to the end of my section. I'm going to hand over to Shelley in a moment, but we just wanted to give a good overview of the various sort of governing models and give you the opportunity to sort of think about roles and responsibilities and think about directions of travel, you know, whether that's in larger organisations or taking it back to, you know, earlier stage, whether you're running a project or whether you've turned into a company and you're now thinking about these various moving parts. So on that note, Shelley, if I hand to you, we still should have a good half hour or so in groups, if we can do that.
No worries. Do we want to stop recording then, Michaela?
I shall. Do you want to just set the task? Because it might be that.
Yeah, of course. So in a second, I'm going to put you into breakout groups of about 3 to 4 participants. And we'd like you to take a look at these questions. So we've got about half an hour. So if each member of the group could spend 8 to 10 minutes talking about their organisation specifically, and if one of you could keep time just so everyone gets a chance to talk about their situation. So what we want you to discuss as a group. So is your legal structure and current governance model working for you at the moment? What are the pros and cons of the way that you're set up at the moment?
And it might be that you're an individual, or it might be that you're within a large organisation. You can only speak for your part, but you know, it's where you're at right now.
So how are you finding managing your board or your group? Is it functioning well? And is it leading towards the outcomes, the values that you're aiming for? Do you think you've got the plans and processes in place that you need for the next stage of development for where you're trying to evolve to? And then finally, what could be improved and what might your next steps be? And what we'd like each of you to come out with is maybe 1 to 3 steps as to what you could do next to improve your organisation's governance. Now, what I'll do is I'll put you into breakout rooms now, and I'll also post these questions into the chat so you can still see them when the screen disappears.
Yeah. And everybody's going to be at a different stage, and that's fine. And you know, you can learn from that conversation that you'll have with others. And we're not going to ask you to feedback loads. We'll just perhaps hear a couple of reflections before we then take a bit of a.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the group will, I'm sure, have practical advice and suggestions if you ask some questions to delve deeper. But you'll definitely have some ideas from your personal experience that you can contribute to whatever somebody's situation might be. So I'm setting up the breakout rooms now, and you can join them when you're ready. Great, and welcome back. I'm Shelley from Flourish, and I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of policies and procedures, which are another part of the governance jigsaw puzzle, and one that we do need to pay attention to. So what we thought we'd start by doing, hopefully we'll grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, is just to start to hear from the group about what your experience of policies and procedures is so far to date. And as we know, we've got a variety of people on the call, so it might mean that you've not got round to setting up any policies and procedures yet, or you might have a bank which you rely on a regular basis. We'd like to hear, so at what point did you decide you needed to
All right, Shelley. It was just
meeting. There we go. Yeah, so at what point did you decide you needed to put these together? What do you have in place already? And are there any areas that you feel that you really should be starting to think about? Anything that you think you need to improve or that you need some support with that we might be able to help with? So it would be fantastic to hear from the group. So does anyone here have some policies and procedures in place? And if so, which ones have you already set up?
Hi, we've set up ours, which are like things like safeguarding, health and safety, some other ones as well, like volunteers policy. Oh gosh, the ones that gone out of my head. I think things like privacy, GDPR. Those are the first ones I started off with.
Well, that's a great start, Asma. Really good.
What made you do these? Because sometimes you think, well, what are these things and when do I need them? So what point did you think, oh, I need this?
When I decided that it's going to turn into a charity, it's going to be, because it was initially like a constituted group, and then obviously when I decided that it's going to become a charity, and I was speaking to Action Together, who are based in Rochdale, and they suggested that, you know, that you need these policies in place so that basically, you know, when service users are using you, they know that you're trustworthy and that you've got things in place. And even like councils and things like that. I remember the DA, domestic abuse coordinator at the Rochdale Council, she'd heard that I was running a group in this community, and she'd come and like met up with me. and she discussed about policies and procedures. So that's where
that was from a level of, sounds like a level of professionalism, and we might have from other people where it was something else that triggered, but from a level of having to be sort of professionalized and structure yourself in a certain way, and for your reputation, that was the point that you put those. That sounds interesting. Sorry, Shelley, you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you go about putting them in place when you needed them?
Yeah, so we just looked for policies. To be honest with you, we started looking for policies online, like with domestic abuse charities and mental health charities, because you can get policies and then reading it up ourselves. So I got help with 2 volunteers that I had at the time, which was an admin volunteer and one was a law student. So we together, we read through things on there and saw if it's if it works for us, and then checked it off with Action Together as well. But they also provide templates for lots of different things. So yeah, because for me, what happened was I started the group in the community as a constituted, and actually we were quite visible quite fast. And this thing that you're all saying about these big organizations, they don't want you to, basically they didn't want us to be formed in Rochdale. I had lots of issues actually before I came to the stage, like the local council as well. I had to just fight through. It got to a point where I needed to stop everything. But no, I just continued because I kept going back to why did I start this, and the lived experience, but also all the training that I got in between. I knew that this is what was needed, so I just kept going. But yeah, it was hardcore.
And where did you find the most useful templates? Like you say, there's lots of different places you can find templates that you can adapt. So which ones did you find most useful?
Which ones did we find? Safeguarding, Gdpr. There's 2 different types of safeguarding ones. One was for adults, one was for children as well. Things like volunteer policies and stuff, I got help with Action Together. And we've got a trustee actually on the board now who's got a lot of experience on that side of things. So she's read over all of them as well for us, and then come back to and said just now make all of them the same, the fonts, make sure you put your logo in and things. So that quite lucky that we've got this good trustee as well now on board who has all that experience.
It's fantastic if you can get somebody on your board who is experienced in governance. That's such a useful resource to have, definitely. Thanks, Asma, that's great. I've got a note in the chat here.
Tina's given described an experience there. I don't know if she wants to come and say a little bit about the point that she was kind of almost forced into it due to either people around her or to circumstances. Sometimes you're forced into it because of the stage of development that you've got to. Sometimes it's because of what's going on within the, to cover your back and support yourself. And any thoughts from your side, Tina, on I don't know if you can come off mute, and you might have bits going on, but if you can, we'd gladly hear it from you than from in the chat. Don't mind either way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I everything kind of happened really quickly at the start. So I'd applied for the £500 Try It award from Unlimited, and so I had a bank account, I think, from the day before I incorporated. And then
Unlimited won't be asking you for policies particularly.
No, not at all. But I'm just saying,
other funders will, won't they?
Other people will, and then everything happened quite quickly, and I got a website, and I had an email account and was keeping people's email addresses, and then last Christmas we asked for people's actual addresses so that we could send them Christmas presents. So then signed up with the Information Commission, Commissioner's Office. But I knew, the safeguarding policy, it's an adult safeguarding policy. And that I got basically to cover my back just from the start, just in case, because we support a lot of trans women. And we haven't had any issues, but, and then last year we put on a social event for trans people to have some kind of peer support around specialist items of clothing that would make their lives more easier. And we had a pile on from the gender criticals on Twitter, and it was all, there's no age limit on this, and where's your safeguarding policy, and this is a red flag, and they were tagging all of our funders, and had to put a statement out, and I just, you know, at the time I was like, oh crap, you know, I need to do a child safeguarding policy. And I thought, no, because we don't do child specific, anything child specific. In the future, I'd love to, you know, I'd love to be a mini kind of LGBT foundation and, you know, be everything to the community. But right now we're still tiny.
You make some good points there around putting the policies in that are appropriate for your organisation at that time. And I'm sorry to hear that you had those things happen, but you make some good points there, because if people don't put these things in place, or they don't even, the thing, and Shelley will come on to show you them all and have a look at this, but you can have these policies there, but make sure you read them, digest them, make sure you understand them. And if you don't understand them, ask some peers, some colleagues, or somewhere like accounts of voluntary services like Action Together or MAC or Salford CVS or Sector 3. We can put you in touch with whoever's local to you to check this through, and there's training to help you understand this stuff. To be fair, those policies and procedures should be written in a way, or you can find them written in a way that make perfect sense, and it's just they will uncover things that you aren't doing, or that you forgot about, or that you might need to just adjust something a little bit to make sure that you don't fall short of perhaps what you're expected to be doing. And likewise, like Tina said, that if you're not doing it, you don't necessarily need to have a policy on that.
It's just it takes your time and your focus, and you know, when you're one person trying to do a good job, you know, it's really frustrating, and you've got to then fight the people who are creating the problems for the people that you're trying to support in the first place, and that's what they want to waste your time and take your energy away from the good work that you're doing. And you know, I don't know, but probably wouldn't have taken that long to do a child safeguarding policy, but for what? You know,
yeah, absolutely. And it's I'm sorry you had that experience for a start. That sounds really stressful. But it's, I mean, sometimes if you can find an ally in your sector, they'll have done a lot of the thinking for you already. So I think you said, Asma, that you talked to some other domestic abuse organisations, and because it's so much of this stuff is sector specific, you'll have you know, the same policies will be particularly relevant to your situation. So if you can find an ally who's happy to share their template with you, it can shortcut a huge amount of work, and just do that thinking that you might not have done yet, being a small organisation.
In preparing for this, Shelley, we went through a lot of ours, and we're happy. You might take us a week or so to pull it together, but we're happy to put together a little policies pack. To be fair, it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel when there's CVSs out there, but sometimes it's good to have a few templates to compare and contrast. Definitely. Shelley's got some links for you. She's going to share around all of that. Just before you move on, Shelley, I've just spotted in the chat, it's almost the flip side. So you've got Asma, who for professionalism, reputation, and getting to that point where she realised she needed to put the policies in place, went ahead and did it. You've got Tina, who initially, through things that had sort of flared up, to cover her back and to also just be clear on what she does and doesn't need to do from a standing start, put hers in place. Usually the trigger point for putting these things in place is funding, and that's where Mary's come in the chat saying, and if you've seen, she had to get certain ones in place for funding. Often this goes off people's radar until the funder says, well, can I see your copy of this, this and this? And that's often like, oh, what's that? Or that's when people start going, what's this? So you know, it's another good point to make there. There's different points in time where you realise what you might need, and hopefully today's workshop, as it continues in a second, will give you a really good reflection point to think, have I got this stuff? Where will I get it? And so over to you, Shelley.
Yeah, and just before I move on to chat through some of the policies and procedures you might be wanting to think about, so are there any areas that anyone feels that they have got stuck with, or they need improvement, or that we could support with, because we will be sending these resources around to the group afterwards? So is there anything that you've got a question mark over that we might be able to help guide you with?
I do want to ask, you know, when you say policy and procedures, are they like two different things?
Yeah, I'll come on to that, and it's a good question, Asma, because often they get grouped together like it's this homogenous thing, but they are two separate things. So I'll explain what they are and why you need both in a moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or anything anyone would like us to help support with before I move on to the next bit? No, great. Okay, let's move on to the next slide.
And sometimes you don't know what you don't know, so we'll come back and ask that question again with once we've had a chat as well.
So yeah, just to summarise policies and procedures. So they're clear and they're appropriate, like you say, Tina, they're appropriate to your organisation context, and they're a set of, basically it's an instruction manual, and they're there to help you ensure that your organisation is run well. So for a number of reasons they're useful. So first of all, they ensure compliance with the law and regulation, and they provide an appropriate controls and framework for delegation. It says by the board, but also by the organisation. So as your organisation grows beyond yourself, there's a need to help instruct everyone who's involved, and whether it's that you're taking on contractors, whether you're growing your board, or you've got volunteers working for you. This is an instruction manual, because if it's all in your head, the rest of your team can't be expected to know how you do things in order to ensure that the organisation is run well, which is what governing is ultimately. Governance is ultimately. So it's the expectations, it's an instruction manual, and it's transparency and accountability. So it is helpful. I remember working with a particular advisor who came out onto a charity I was working with, and she said, once you've done your policies and procedures, you check everyone knows them, and then you put them in a drawer, and having them and adhering to them will avert some crises. And also it just means if that difficult person does come to you and say, look, how do you do this? What's your process for, you know, whistleblowing, or if you receive a complaint or there's a safeguarding issue, knowing that you know what to do and everyone in your organisation knows what to do, and also that you can share that with the rest of the world is really important. And consequently, that limits the risk of your organisation to get tripped up by something or make a mistake that becomes problematic. So coming back to your question, Asma, so basically a policy is the statement of how you intend to conduct your services. So it's the aspiration. So it's a set of guiding principles. So if I can give you an example, I scribbled one down earlier. The policy for safeguarding. So you might have a policy which says, our policy is to ensure that safe recruitment practices are in place. So that's the ambition. The procedure is the instruction manual. So it describes exactly how that policy will be put into action in organisations. So having the aspiration isn't enough. You can't just say, we will do this. You then need to give your team and yourself the instructions how to do that. So it could be, for safe recruitment practices, for example, you could have some specifics like all board members have to have an enhanced DBS in place before starting. It could be that anyone coming into contact with children, young people, or vulnerable adults has to have the enhanced DBS in place before any contact. So it's very, very clear guidance, and it means that you know, and your staff know, for example, that that contractor can't start working because they haven't put the appropriate paperwork in place. And it also means that you can more effectively delegate what needs to be done, because if your team have got this instruction manual, they'll know exactly what documentation they need to get in place, what checks and balances they need to do before anything happens. And it means that the policy that you've aspired to gets lived up to. Does that make sense, Asma? And we tend to put them together. You'll have the set of policies, and then you'll have the procedures underneath, and they'll go hand in hand and be read kind of in parallel with each other.
And often a set of them will then form part of your sort of staff handbook when you get to that point, or your operational manual, or whatever you want to call it. And
we're just doing that actually, the staff handbook actually, and we're going to be putting the things on there. So that's brilliant. Yeah.
And they end up being sections of it or appendices of it. And you don't need these necessarily from day dot. When you're piloting and doing bits and pieces, that's one thing. But when you're starting to sort of you get to that point where you're repeating things, you've got certain funds for doing certain things, and where you've grown to a point where you've put sort of governance model in place, that these things become really key. And as Shelley said there, it's all well and good writing these things, but you need to make sure that your board and that your staff team have had sight of these. And that can, it's when everyone's busy or teams are small or there's just you and 2 or 3 other people, it's getting into that good practice of starting that and starting inductions that include those sorts of things where you can, just so that, things.
Because once you've got them, they're a really valuable resource. They are, a little bit tricky to write, but once you've got them, you can then say, right, these are the ones that the board members need to see before they start, and these are the ones that the operational side need to see. You can link to checklists, you can link to templates, and you can hand it over as a pack as people start to really help them on board with your organisation.
Fab.
Has anyone got any questions on the difference between policies and procedures before I move on? No, I don't think so. Okay.
It's not a question, but just to say that I used to work for Together Trust, and we had a massive load of policies and procedures, and staff were supposed to sign to say that they'd read and understood them. They were all written in legalese.
Oh no.
It was terrible. So what we did was we did a one-page front sheet that was a plain English summary of the key important points. And all we required staff to do was to have read those. And I do think there's a danger of overwhelming people.
Totally, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point, Dee. And as you say, yeah, they should be, like Michaela said, they should be easy to read and easy to understand. And they should also be actionable and deliverable. So if you're looking through this and looking through your procedures and going, we don't have the capacity to do these, you need to simplify it. Think about what the priorities are. Is this essential? And if not, can it be taken out? If they don't get read and if they don't get understood and actioned, they're basically pointless. So less is always more. And there's things, again, talking to peers who are in a similar situation or who have experience of this thing is really useful, because going back to Tina's point earlier about having a safeguarding policy, safe for children and young people. So if you don't engage with children and young people, you might think you don't need a policy, and you might be right to some extent, but for example, your data protection policy does need to reference children and young people, because if they send you an email, you then have the personal sensitive information of a young person. So it's a really simple thing. You can say, we do not engage with children and young people. We require, for any contact forms, people to be over 18. And then everyone on your website team knows that there has to be a tick box saying that somebody is over 18, and then you're simplifying what you have to do because of the nature of the operation. Does that make sense?
And another point on this as well is, so you might put your documents together, you've kind of cobbled together all these templates, you've looked at them, you've added your company or organisational name in where you should, cut and paste, find and replace, whatever it is. We all fudge these documents and you have to kind of rush them through. But, it's really worth giving them a good read through. As Shelley says, taking out bits that don't make sense, adding in extra bits or extra procedures that do to make it workable for you. And there's usually, not on all of them, but you can add in a table on a separate sheet or within the document that says, this was signed by the manager or signed off by the board on such and such a date, and you have a little table, and is up for review in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, or so usually once you put them down, you, as you say, you may put them in a drawer, you may keep them in a file, you may have them to hand and be using them, but you don't have to update or review them for 2 or 3 years. And it's just a case of listening out, either through your networks, through the newsletters and CVSs, on the news or whatever, in terms of keeping up with legislation. And sometimes a tweak will get made to an act, which means that you need to update your policies and procedures and things like that. But it doesn't happen very often. Once they're written and they should work for numerous years. And
on that point, just a way to simplify things. So having, making sure you have a lead individual in charge of that particular policy and procedure means that they can be the person who needs to be the one keeping an eye out for changes in legislation, things that need to be updated. Not every member of your team needs to be the expert in every policy and procedure. So if you can divvy it up that way, when it comes to review time, they can be feeding in expertise from what's happened in the in the legal situation, and that coupled with somebody on the operational side who can say, well, practically we can do this, or this might be a simpler way of running this process, and together having kind of the lead and the operational expert makes a really good team. And then just something that I found really simple in terms of practice. On your board agenda, so however often you meet and however often you decide to review your policies and procedures, just have a date, so a governance section with a date as to exactly when each policy and procedure is due for review. And then at the beginning of every board meeting, you can do a quick check of governance. insurance is up to date, company accounts are up to date, so forth. And you can see exactly when the next review is for your policies and procedures as well. And having those dates in means you don't keep having to revisit and check each time you meet whether something needs updating. Okay, moving on to the next slide.
Can I just say as well that if anything goes wrong, if there's an incident and maybe or a disciplinary, the first thing that's looked at is whether the procedures were followed. So I don't think people always understand why they need to know what the policies and procedures are, particularly the procedures, but it gives the employee or the volunteer indemnity if they followed the procedures. So that's why it is important to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just reduces the chance of something going wrong, because if you've done things, in a sensible and logical way, then the risk is reduced.
And we all sound like we're really well behaved, but I'm just putting a flag out there as someone running one of these shows, just like you all are, to say, how important this is, because we're all so busy. We haven't always got time to keep looking at all of this stuff, or the next board meeting's not for another quarter, or we've just taken on 3 staff. Doing this, and I'll be honest and say, doing this workshop has made me think, oh, actually, what do we need to be putting in place with our staff to make sure that they do understand all of this stuff? And making sure that when we're running new courses and projects, the risk assessments that we do are like up to date, following current standards and so on. So, you impart learning it as you go and putting things in place as appropriate for the size of your organisation, but also hopefully from today, if not previously, working to it like a benchmark of a bare minimum, as Shelley's shown you here, so that you can then sort of build your good practice from there.
So I'll just quickly chat through this checklist, and I just reiterate, if you don't have all of these in place already, don't worry. There will be things that prompt you to get them in place, and often, like Nicola says, it's often a funding bid which says, in order to apply for this, you need to have this in place. This one is essential, health and safety, but if you employ 5 people or more, and that's employee on payroll.
But it's just good practice. It's just good practice to have one. If you're running community events and projects and stuff, don't take it that, oh, well, I'm not employing anybody, so I don't need this. It's really just really sensible and good practice. And a funder might prompt you to it, but as Asma's got a gold star, she did hers before even the funders got on her back. So well done.
And on that, again, just going back to, if you can have somebody on your team, whether it's on the operational side or on the board, who has experience of doing safety risk assessments, it's invaluable. It will save you so much time, and they can just whip through those things. They know exactly which forms to create, and save you a huge amount of time. So I'd put that as a must do. Safeguarding policy. So if you work with children, young people, and or vulnerable adults, you absolutely must have a safeguarding policy in place. Your data protection policy and GDPR. So again, this is actually mandatory, not to have a policy and procedure, but to be GDPR compliant. Now, it is fiddly, and it is annoying. So GDPR is really annoying, but it is really important. I would recommend looking at somebody's template. I know some of the local CVSs have these that you can adapt. And also the ICO, who somebody's mentioned already, they do have a helpline. And so you can call them and chat to somebody and say, look, I'm struggling with this. What should I do about this? And they are really helpful. So that's a good resource.
And what we can do...
Sorry to interrupt, I was just going to make a suggestion. There's other resources as well to do with GDPR.
Oh, yes, please, Samira.
I was just saying there's other resources to do with GDPR, because around disclosure as well. If people are disclosing different information, you need to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know of some resources, or was it a request?
I think I've got a GDPR resource, but the specific thing about disclosure, I've got some examples of how I've disclosed information, so I can share like a generic version, make a generic version of those.
That would be
forms.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to put together this template pack. So yeah, if you could send that over to us, we'll include that
I think the basic thing is just the information that people share with you, just look after it really well. That's actually something that we've been working on, just to make sure that people are safe online. So we can maybe have a conversation with you on another point about that, because it links into GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be really useful, and I've got a template relating to GDPR as well, and yeah, exactly, you know, how you process it, how you gather information, store information, how you process it. If you have a website, you should have a cookies policy, you should have a privacy policy. But again, these are things we can provide templates for that you can adapt according to your need. An equality and diversity policy. Again, this becomes essential once you start to have employees. You need to have that in place, and some funders will request it as well. And it's obviously really good practice. Risk management, including assessment and mitigation. You might want to have a risk register. And again, if you can get that brilliant person who understands health, safety and risk assessment in place to assist with that, that's really useful. Finance, I think, depending on your situation. So if you've got a full governing document, articles and memorandum in place, then you might not necessarily need that, because some of this will be covered off in there. But we found, as an unincorporated association, some funders did ask for a financial policy because it's not necessarily in the governing document, and they just wanted to know exactly what the checks and balances are to make sure that nobody runs off with their money, basically. But again, that's something that's quite simple to get put together, and it just gets you to think about what the process is for paying for stuff, whether you want a procurement process, who looks after petty cash and so forth, just to keep your organisation's money safe. And then there's some other ones, and again, these will be things that you start to introduce into your organisation as and when you need them. So HR related ones, so how to contract people, how long you store, this will relate to GDPR. If you've got people's CVs coming in, how long you store them, how you communicate that to people whose data you're gathering. Environmental, this is something that people might find that they're quite keen on. They want to set a sort of aspiration in terms of sustainability and how they buy things. So those,
whilst funders might not ask for some of these, commissioners or people offering you contracts will. You might find a difference, whereas the top set you'll have come across through funders. If you start to go into contracts or into grant agreements with particular councils or educational authorities or whoever, you'll find that the list of these starts to broaden out.
Yeah. And again, just really good practice. If you are recruiting people either for permanent positions or for contracts, it's really helpful to have the policy and procedure in place, because it takes just one person to say, I don't think this has been a fair process. And if you haven't got any guidelines for how you make sure you run a fair recruitment process, you can find yourself in legal difficulty. So having a clear and fair process set out and adhered to is really useful, and again, reduces your risk. So a couple of useful links here in the slides, which we're going to share with the group afterwards. NCVO, really useful. Your local CVS, always worth asking what templates they have. It's great to go to those organisations because they will have been sense checked. They'll comply with local legislation. Sometimes, occasionally, you might Google a template and find something that either is appropriate to say America, where they don't have GDPR legislation. So these ones are really good. Some funders as well, because they will have been sense checked and they will be in the right area at least.
Really good points. And I guess just a tip as well, in a session coming up before the end of January, where we're looking at finances, Gurge, who's running the session, actually works for the ICO now. So we can collar him on these sorts of questions, should you have them when you come back next time. We could, he's around for some one-to-ones, both financial stuff, but also GDPR related stuff. He's got quite an expertise on, and if it comes up as a topic where people feel they need this, then we can run other sessions. And within our how-to festival coming up in the spring, some of these topics can also get covered with a bit more depth as well.
That sounds really useful.
So awesome. Well, I hope that's been helpful. We don't often talk about this. We talk about legal structures a lot. We talk about roles and responsibilities, but hopefully it's been interesting and useful to just reflect on these policies and procedures, sort of terminology, where to get help, and hear from some of your peers on the call on how they've gone about it and at what point. So we will break for lunch, and I'm going to stop recording.